The rain hammered against the windows of Pages and Poetry, the small independent bookstore tucked away on Maple Street. Daniel Richardson adjusted his reading glasses and turned another page of the biography he'd been pretending to read for the past 20 minutes. At 45, he'd perfected the art of looking busy while his mind wandered to places he'd rather not explore: failed marriage, a strange teenage daughter, the promotion that felt more like a gilded cage than an achievement. The brass bell above the door chimed, and a whirlwind of energy burst through the entrance. A young woman with rain-dampened auburn hair shook off her vintage leather jacket, sending droplets dancing through the warm, book-scented air. She couldn't have been older than 21 or 22, Daniel estimated, watching as she immediately gravitated toward the poetry section with the kind of enthusiasm he'd forgotten existed. "Excuse me." Her voice carried the musical quality of someone who still believed the world held infinite possibilities. "Do you happen to have anything by Rainer Maria Rilke? Specifically, Letters to a Young Poet?" Margaret, the elderly store owner, looked up from her crossword puzzle with a knowing smile. "Top shelf, dear, though I'm afraid you'll need the latter." Daniel found himself standing before his mind could object. "I can reach it," he offered, his voice rougher than intended after an hour of silence. The young woman turned, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not the cardiac concern of a middle-aged man, but something more dangerous. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, shifting between gray and blue, and when she smiled, it reached those eyes completely. "That's incredibly kind. Thank you," she said, extending a paint-stained hand. "I'm Lily, by the way, Lily Chen." "Daniel," he replied, noting how her handshake was firm and unafraid. "Daniel Richardson." He retrieved the book easily, their fingers brushing as he handed it to her. The contact lasted perhaps a second longer than necessary, and Daniel wondered if he'd imagined the slight intake of breath from both of them. "This is perfect," Lily said, cradling the book like a treasure. "I'm starting my MFA in creative writing next month, and everyone says Rilke is essential reading. Though honestly, I picked him because I love how he writes about love. Like it's this transformative force that changes everything it touches." Daniel almost smiled at her earnestness. "And you believe that? That love can transform everything, don't you?" The question hung between them, innocent and loaded simultaneously. Before Daniel could formulate an answer that wouldn't reveal too much of his cynicism, the lights flickered. Margaret looked up concerned as thunder rolled overhead. "Storm's getting worse," she announced. "I might close early tonight." Lily glanced toward the window where rain was now coming down in sheets. "Oh no, I walked here. I'm going to be absolutely soaked." "I have a car," Daniel heard himself saying. "I could give you a ride." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. When was the last time he'd offered help to a stranger? When was the last time he'd wanted to extend a conversation rather than end it? "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." Lily's politeness was genuine, not the social nicety he was accustomed to in his corporate world. "It's no trouble at all. I was heading out anyway." That was a lie. He'd planned to browse until Margaret closed, then grab dinner alone at the diner down the street. The same routine he'd followed every Thursday for months. But something about Lily's presence made his usual solitude feel less like peace and more like punishment. As they waited for Margaret to ring up Lily's purchase, Daniel studied the young woman beside him. She wore no wedding ring, just a silver band with an intricate Celtic knot on her middle finger. Her jeans were artfully distressed, probably intentionally, and her burgundy sweater looked like something from a vintage shop. Everything about her suggested creativity, spontaneity, life lived in full color. He thought of his own wardrobe, rows of identical navy suits, white shirts pressed to mathematical precision, ties that conveyed authority rather than personality. When had he become so monochromatic? "Ready?" Lily asked, clutching her book and a small paper bag containing what appeared to be bookmarks. Daniel nodded and held the door for her, noting how she ducked her head against the rain with a laugh rather than the irritated grimace most people would wear. His BMW was parked directly in front, and he unlocked it quickly, both of them hurrying through the downpour. Inside the car, the atmosphere shifted. The space felt smaller, more intimate. Lily's presence filled it with an energy that Daniel's luxury sedan had never contained. She smelled like rain and something floral, not perfume, but perhaps her shampoo or body lotion. "This is a beautiful car," she said, running her hand over the leather seat. "Very sophisticated." There was something in her tone that made Daniel glance at her. But what? "You said sophisticated, like you might say expensive or intimidating." There was definitely a but in there somewhere. Lily laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the storm-dark interior. "You're very perceptive. I was going to say it's beautiful, but it feels like it's never been on an adventure. Like it's only ever driven to very important, very serious places." Daniel considered this as he started the engine. And what would constitute an adventure for a car? "Oh, road trips to nowhere in particular. Drives to see the sunrise. Getting covered in dust at outdoor concerts. Carrying home Christmas trees that are definitely too big. Being packed with camping gear and friends who sing terrible songs at the top of their lungs." As she spoke, Daniel could picture it all. A version of life he'd never allowed himself to consider. His car went to the office, the gym, the grocery store, the bookstore. Reliable destinations for a reliable man. "Where to?" he asked, realizing he'd been sitting in park, lost in thought. "Oh, I'm sorry. 1247 Willow Street. It's just a few blocks from campus. I have a tiny apartment above Mrs. Patterson's garage. She's this wonderful elderly woman who makes the most incredible apple pies and insists I'm too thin." As Daniel navigated the wet streets, Lily continued talking. She told him about her undergraduate degree in English literature, her plans for graduate school, her part-time job at a local art gallery. She spoke with the kind of passion that Daniel envied, complete investment in each topic, as if everything in her world was worthy of enthusiasm. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "What do you do when you're not rescuing damsels in bookstores?" "I work in corporate finance," Daniel replied, the words feeling particularly mundane in contrast to her vibrant life. "Richardson and Associates. We handle mergers and acquisitions mainly." "That sounds incredibly complex, and probably stressful." "It has its moments." Daniel turned onto Willow Street, noting the tree-lined road with its mix of older homes and converted apartments. It was the kind of neighborhood where young professionals and graduate students lived, the kind of place he'd never had reason to visit. "There it is." Lily pointed to a charming Victorian house with a separate garage. "The blue one with all the flowers." Daniel pulled into the driveway, noting the explosion of color that surrounded the property. Even in the rain, the garden was beautiful wildflowers mixed with carefully tended roses, herbs growing in repurposed containers, a small vegetable patch visible behind a white picket fence. "Mrs. Patterson is an amazing gardener," Lily explained, following his gaze. "She's teaching me, though I'm afraid I'm better at killing plants than growing them so far." They sat for a moment, engine running, windshield wipers creating a rhythmic soundtrack to the strange intimacy of the moment. Daniel knew he should say goodbye, wish her well with her studies, drive back to his empty downtown condo. Instead, he found himself searching for a reason to extend their time together. "Would you?" he began, then stopped. What was he doing? She was young enough to be his daughter. Well, not quite. He'd been 24 when his daughter Sarah was born. But close enough to make this entire situation inappropriate. "Would I what?" Lily asked gently, turning in her seat to face him. In the dim light of the car, she looked even younger. Her face was makeup-free, revealing the natural clarity of youth. There were no lines around her eyes, no evidence of the disappointments that had carved themselves into his own features. She was beautiful in the way that only the very young could be, unmarked by life's compromises. "Nothing," he said finally. It was nothing important. But Lily continued to study him with those storm-colored eyes, and Daniel had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see through his polite deflection. "You were going to ask me something," she said. "I can tell. My grandmother always said I had a gift for reading people." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I was going to ask if you'd like to have coffee sometime, but that would be inappropriate. Why? The question was simple, direct, without guile. Because, Daniel gestured vaguely between them, because I'm old enough to be your father. Because we're from completely different worlds. Because you're just starting your life, and I'm... He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. You're what? Finished with yours. The accuracy of her assessment hit him like a physical blow. Something like that. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the spine of her Rilke book. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. You know what Rilke wrote about being lonely? He said that being solitary is difficult, but that the difficulty of it serves some purpose. He thought loneliness could teach us things about ourselves that we couldn't learn any other way. Daniel found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by the unexpected depth in her voice. But he also wrote, she continued, that the only journey is the one within. Maybe the question isn't whether you're too old or I'm too young. Maybe the question is whether we're brave enough to take an unexpected journey. Before Daniel could respond, Lily opened the car door. The sound of rain filled the space between them, and cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. Thank you for the ride, Daniel Richardson, she said, stepping out into the storm. Then, leaning down to meet his eyes one more time, I work at the Morrison Gallery on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. If you ever want to see some art, that's definitely been on adventures. She closed the door gently and ran through the rain to her apartment, leaving Daniel sitting in his perfectly clean, perfectly safe, perfectly predictable car, wondering what had just happened to his carefully ordered world. Tuesday arrived like an unwelcome reminder of Daniel's internal struggle. He'd spent the weekend alternating between forgetting about Lily entirely and replaying every moment of their conversation. By Monday evening, he'd convinced himself that visiting the Morrison Gallery would be a mistake of epic proportions. By Tuesday morning, he'd changed his mind 3 times before his first cup of coffee. The Richardson and Associates offices occupied the 32nd floor of downtown's most prestigious building, all glass and steel and intimidating views. Daniel had always taken pride in his corner office, with its leather furniture and carefully curated art safe. Expensive pieces that conveyed success without risk. But today, staring out at the city spread below him, he felt trapped by the very symbols of his achievement. Sir, his assistant, Jennifer, appeared in the doorway. Your 2 o'clock canceled. Should I move up the Hartwell meeting? Daniel glanced at his watch. It was already 1:30. No, he heard himself saying. Actually, I think I'll step out for a bit. Cancel the rest of my appointments for today. Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. In the 5 years she'd worked for him, Daniel had never canceled appointments without cause. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Richardson? Fine, he lied, already reaching for his coat. I just need to handle something personal. The Morrison Gallery was located in the Arts District, a part of town Daniel rarely visited. The building itself was a converted warehouse, its brick facade painted white and decorated with colorful murals that seemed to pulse with life. As he approached the entrance, Daniel felt increasingly out of place in his charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes. Through the large windows, he could see people moving about inside: young professionals, artists, students. They wore jeans and flowing skirts, vintage jackets and paint-stained aprons. They belonged here in a way Daniel feared he never could. He almost turned around, almost got back in his car and returned to the safety of spreadsheets and conference calls. But then he saw her. Lily stood before a massive canvas, explaining something to a small group of visitors. She wore a flowing emerald dress that complemented her auburn hair, which was pulled back in a loose bun with rebellious strands framing her face. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, and even from outside, Daniel could see the passion in her gestures. The bell chimed as he entered, a different sound from the bookstore, more contemporary, like wind chimes rather than brass. The gallery space was open and airy, with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors. Paintings, sculptures, and mixed media pieces filled the space, each more vibrant and alive than anything in his corporate collection. Welcome to Morrison Gallery, A young man with geometric tattoos and a friendly smile approached him. "I'm Marcus. Is this your first visit?" "Yes," Daniel replied, feeling increasingly conscious of how formal he must appear. "I was told someone named Lily works here?" "Lily," Marcus called across the space. "You have a visitor." She turned, and the smile that spread across her face when she saw Daniel made something warm unfold in his chest. She excused herself from her group and walked over, her dress swishing softly with each step. "You came," she said simply, but her eyes held a mixture of surprise and pleasure. "I was in the neighborhood," Daniel lied smoothly, then immediately wondered why he felt the need to lie about it. "Of course you were," Lily replied with a knowing smile. "The financial district is so close to the arts district. Practically neighbors." Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. Was he that transparent? "Would you like a tour?" she asked, gesturing to the artwork around them. "We're featuring local emerging artists this month. The theme is breaking boundaries." How perfectly appropriate, Daniel thought wryly. "I'd like that." As they moved through the gallery, Lily transformed. Her earlier enthusiasm in the bookstore paled compared to how she became when discussing art. She spoke about color theory and emotional impact, about artists who used unconventional materials to challenge viewers' expectations. Her knowledge was impressive, but more than that, her passion was infectious. "This piece," she stopped before a sculpture made entirely of discarded electronics, was created by a former tech executive who gave up his corporate job to become an artist. He says it represents the death of authentic communication in our digital age. Daniel studied the sculpture, noting how the tangled wires and broken screens created something both beautiful and disturbing. How old was he when he made the change? 47, Lily replied, watching Daniel's face carefully. He said it was terrifying but necessary, that he'd spent so long being successful that he'd forgotten what it meant to be alive. They moved to the next piece, but Daniel's mind remained on the sculpture and its creator. 47. 2 years older than Daniel himself. "What about this one?" he asked, stopping before a painting that seemed to pulse with movement despite being completely still. Lily's eyes lit up. "This is my favorite. It's called Moment of Decision. See how the colors seem to swirl toward the central point? The artist painted it during a period of major life transition. She said it represents that moment when you realize you have to choose between who you've always been and who you might become." Daniel stared at the painting, feeling an uncomfortable recognition. The swirling colors seemed to mirror his own internal turbulence since meeting Lily. "She was 52 when she painted it," Lily added quietly. "After her divorce. She said it was the first honest thing she'd created in decades." They continued through the gallery, and Daniel found himself seeing the world through Lily's eyes. She pointed out details he never would have noticed, the way light played across a sculpture, the emotional journey visible in a series of photographs, the story told through the arrangement of mixed media pieces. "You have an incredible eye for this," Daniel said as they paused before the final piece. A massive canvas covered in what appeared to be abstract explosions of color. "Thank you," Lily smiled. "My professors always said I was better at analyzing art than creating it. I think that's why I ended up here instead of in a studio somewhere, covered in paint and starving for my art." "And do you regret that? Not being the starving artist?" Lily considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to create something that moved people the way these pieces move me. But then I think about all the artists I've met through this job, all the stories I've heard, all the different ways people express their truth. I think maybe my role is to help other people see what these artists are trying to say." She turned to face him fully, and Daniel was struck again by her directness, the way she seemed incapable of small talk or social games. "What about you?" she asked. "When you were young, what did you want to be when you grew up?" The question caught Daniel off guard. No one had asked him that in years, decades maybe. "I wanted to be a writer," he said, surprising himself with the honesty. "I thought I'd write the great American novel, live in a cabin somewhere, make important statements about the human condition. What happened? Life happened. College loans, then my girlfriend got pregnant, then marriage, then the mortgage, then private school for Sarah, then the divorce. He trailed off, realizing how it sounded like a series of excuses rather than choices. Sarah is your daughter? Was. Is. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke to his frustration. She's 22 now. We don't talk much. She thinks I chose work over family. She's probably right. Lily was quiet for a moment, and Daniel braced himself for judgment or pity. Instead, she said, my parents divorced when I was 15. Dad remarried, moved to Seattle, started a new family. For years I was angry about it. Felt like he'd replaced us. And now I think people are complicated. We make the best choices we can with the information we have at the time. Sometimes those choices hurt people we love. Sometimes they hurt us too. She paused, studying the abstract painting before them. But I also think it's never too late to make different choices. Before Daniel could respond, Marcus approached them. Lily, Mrs. Morrison, is here. She wants to discuss the catalog for next month's show. Of course, Lily nodded, then turned to Daniel. I'm sorry, I have to go, Daniel said. This was wonderful. Thank you for showing me around. Will you? She began, then seemed to catch herself. I hope you'll come back. We get new pieces regularly. As Daniel walked toward the exit, he heard Lily greeting Mrs. Morrison with the same enthusiasm she'd shown him. But when he turned back for one last look, he caught her watching him leave, her expression unreadable. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed brighter than when he'd entered. The street, which had felt foreign and intimidating an hour ago, now seemed welcoming. He could smell coffee from a nearby cafe, hear music drifting from a record store, see the life that pulsed through this part of the city. His phone buzzed with work emails, reminders of meetings and deadlines and the careful structure of his normal life. But for the first time in years, Daniel found himself reluctant to return to that world. Instead, he walked slowly back to his car, his mind full of swirling colors and the memory of storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to parts of himself he'd forgotten existed. That evening, alone in his downtown condo with its pristine white walls and minimalist furniture, Daniel found himself sketching. He hadn't picked up a pencil for anything but signing documents in 20 years, but his hands seemed to remember the motion. He drew abstract shapes at first, then gradually, unconsciously, began sketching a face, young, vibrant, alive with the kind of hope he'd lost somewhere along the way to success. When he realized what he'd done, Daniel stared at the drawing for a long time. Then, instead of throwing it away as common sense demanded, he placed it carefully in his desk drawer, next to his business cards and fountain pens, like a secret he wasn't quite ready to examine. The text message arrived on Thursday morning while Daniel was reviewing quarterly projections. There's a new coffee shop next to the gallery. Amazing pastries and terrible poetry readings. Interested? L. Daniel stared at the message for several minutes. How had she gotten his number? Then he remembered. He'd given her his business card when he'd left the gallery, claiming it was, in case she had questions about corporate art acquisition. Even then, he'd known it was a flimsy excuse. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The smart thing would be to politely decline. The professional thing. The age-appropriate thing. What time? He typed instead. 6 p.m.? Fair warning. It's very different from your usual haunts. She wasn't wrong. The grind was everything his usual establishments weren't. Mismatched furniture. Local art covering every wall. The rich scent of coffee beans mixing with the faint aroma of incense. Students hunched over laptops. Artists sketched in notebooks. And couples engaged in intense conversations over small wooden tables. Daniel felt conspicuously overdressed in his work attire. But when Lily waved from a corner table, her smile was so genuine that his self-consciousness began to fade. You made it, she said, standing to greet him. Today she wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that made her eyes look more blue than gray. I already ordered, hope you don't mind. 2 cappuccinos and what the barista promised were life-changing chocolate croissants. Life-changing seems like a high bar for a pastry, Daniel replied, settling into the chair across from her. You'd be surprised what can change your life if you let it, Lily said with a meaningful look that made Daniel's pulse quicken. The coffee was indeed excellent, and the croissants lived up to their billing. But Daniel found himself more interested in watching Lily talk than in eating. She told him about her day at the gallery, about a new artist they were featuring, about her graduate school applications and her hopes for the future. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her dreams so vivid he could almost see them himself. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "How was your day in the world of high finance?" "Predictable," Daniel replied. "Meetings, spreadsheets, more meetings. I helped facilitate the acquisition of a small tech company. On paper, it was a success. But," Daniel paused, struck by how easily she read the subtext in his words. "But I couldn't stop thinking about what you said about that artist, the tech executive who gave up everything to create art. I kept wondering what happened to the founder of this company we just absorbed. Whether he went into it with dreams like yours, whether those dreams died somewhere in the conference room today." Lily leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand. "Do you ever think about going back to writing? At 45? Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I think that ship has sailed." "Has it? Or have you just convinced yourself it has?" Before Daniel could answer, a young man approached their table. He was perhaps 25, with the kind of effortlessly tousled hair that Daniel knew cost more to maintain than it appeared. His flannel shirt and artfully ripped jeans screamed, creative type. And when he smiled at Lily, Daniel felt an unexpected surge of something uncomfortably close to jealousy. "Lily, I thought that was you," the young man said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "How are the grad school applications coming?" "Hey, Jake," Lily replied, her tone friendly but not particularly warm. "They're coming along. Daniel, this is Jake Morrison, Mrs. Morrison's nephew. He's also applying to MFA programs. Jake, this is Daniel Richardson." Jake's handshake was firm, his assessment of Daniel quick and thorough. Daniel could see the questions forming in the younger man's eyes. Who was this older man in the expensive suit, and what was he doing with Lily? "Richardson. Why does that name sound familiar?" Jake mused, then snapped his fingers. "Richardson and Associates. My uncle mentioned your firm might be interested in investing in some local arts initiatives." "Small world." "Very small," Daniel agreed, acutely aware of how this looked, the middle-aged businessman having coffee with a young gallery employee. He could practically hear the assumptions forming. "Well," Jake said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "I should let you get back to your business discussion. Lily, we should grab lunch soon. I want to hear about your thesis proposal." After Jake left, an awkward silence settled over their table. Lily stirred her coffee absently, and Daniel found himself searching for words that wouldn't come. "He likes you," Daniel said finally. "Jake?" Lily looked genuinely surprised. "He's a friend. We're in similar situations, both trying to figure out our artistic paths." "He's more age-appropriate," Daniel said, hating himself even as the words left his mouth. Lily set down her cup with more force than necessary. "Is that what you think this is about? Age-appropriateness? Isn't it?" Daniel met her gaze. "Look around, Lily. Everyone in here is closer to your age than mine. That young man who just left, he understands your world, your goals, your generation's way of seeing things. What do I have to offer you besides expensive dinners and cynicism? What do you have to offer?" Lily repeated, her voice rising slightly. "How about intelligence, perspective, life experience? The way you really listen when someone talks, like their words matter? The fact that you ask thoughtful questions about every single piece of art I showed you. Not because you were trying to impress me, but because you genuinely wanted to understand." Other patrons were beginning to glance in their direction. Daniel felt heat creeping up his neck. "Lily," he said quietly, "I have a daughter your age who won't speak to me. I've been divorced for 8 years. I work 70-hour weeks because I don't have anything else to fill my life. What kind of foundation is that for whatever this is? Maybe that's exactly why we found each other," Lily said, her voice softening. Maybe I need someone who's lived enough to appreciate what matters, and maybe you need someone who still believes in possibilities. Daniel wanted to believe her. Sitting in this coffee shop, watching the passion in her eyes, feeling more alive than he had in years. He wanted to believe that age was just a number, that connection transcended convention, that two people could bridge any gap if they cared enough. But then his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad, can we talk? It's important." The timing felt like the universe's way of reminding him of reality. Sarah, who was Lily's age. Sarah, who had called him distant and emotionally unavailable. Sarah, who had accused him of being incapable of real intimacy. "I should go," Daniel said, standing abruptly. "Daniel, wait." Lily reached for his hand, and the contact sent electricity up his arm. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," he replied, pulling away gently. "You said everything right. That's the problem." He left money on the table, too much, but he was too flustered to count properly, and headed for the door. Behind him, he heard Lily call his name, but he didn't turn around. Outside, the evening air felt sharp against his skin, a reminder that autumn was coming whether he was ready or not. In his car, Daniel sat for several minutes before starting the engine. Through the window of the grind, he could see Lily still sitting at their table, her head in her hands. The image made his chest tight with regret, but he forced himself to look away. His phone displayed Sarah's message again, and this time he called her back. "Dad." Sarah's voice was strained, tired. "Thanks for calling. I'm getting divorced." Daniel closed his eyes. His daughter, barely 2 years older than Lily, was ending her marriage. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said, meaning it. "What can I do to help?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, and for the first time in years, she sounded like the little girl who used to crawl into his lap when she was frightened. I feel like I don't know how to do relationships, like I never learned how to really connect with someone. And I keep thinking about you and Mom, about how things ended." Daniel's throat tightened. "Sarah, I'm not blaming you," she said quickly. "I'm just trying to understand. How do you know when something is worth fighting for? How do you know when to stay and when to walk away?" As Daniel drove home through the darkening city, Sarah's questions echoed in his mind. How do you know when something is worth fighting for? In his rearview mirror, the lights of the grind grew smaller and smaller, but the memory of Lily's eyes hurt, confused, but still hopeful remained as clear as if she were sitting beside him. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel wondered if walking away was always the safe choice, or sometimes just the cowardly one. 3 weeks passed without contact. Daniel threw himself into work with renewed intensity, staying late every evening, taking weekend calls, accepting every social obligation that might fill the hours between sleep and waking. But despite his best efforts to return to his former routine, everything felt different now. Colors seemed more vivid after his time in the gallery. The corporate art in his office looked sterile and lifeless. Even his morning coffee tasted flat, a pale imitation of the rich brew at the grind. Worst of all, he'd started noticing couples everywhere, in the elevator, at restaurants, walking hand in hand on the sidewalks below his office window. Each one served as a reminder of what he'd walked away from. Sarah had moved back to the city temporarily, staying in Daniel's guest room while she sorted out her divorce. Having her there was both a blessing and a torture. She'd inherited her mother's directness and had no qualms about commenting on her father's increasingly obvious restlessness. "You're pacing again," she observed on a Friday evening, looking up from her laptop where she was working on her resume. "You've been doing that a lot lately." Daniel stopped mid-stride across his living room. "I'm not pacing. I'm thinking. Dad, I'm 22, not 12. I know the difference between thinking and avoiding." Sarah closed the laptop and gave him her full attention. "Want to talk about it? There's nothing to talk about, right? That's why you've checked your phone 17 times in the past hour and haven't eaten anything but coffee and anxiety since I got here." Daniel almost smiled despite himself. "When did you become so observant?" "I learned from watching you," Sarah replied. "You taught me that people reveal more about themselves in what they don't say than in what they do." So, who is she? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. What makes you think there's a she? Because I've seen you heartbroken before, after Mom left. This is different. This is the kind of restless energy that comes from running away from something you actually want. Daniel sank into the chair across from his daughter, suddenly feeling every one of his 45 years. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. For a moment, Daniel saw not his daughter but the woman she'd become, wise beyond her years, shaped by the very relationship failures he'd modeled for her. The irony was painful. She's young, he said finally. 21. Smart, passionate, full of life. Everything I used to be before I became. He gestured vaguely at his pristine apartment, his expensive suit hanging in the closet, the life of careful predictability he'd constructed. Before you became successful? Sarah suggested. Before I became afraid, Daniel corrected. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. What's her name? Lily. And you walked away because she's my age? Daniel nodded, expecting judgment or revulsion. Instead, Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering. You know, she said slowly, when I was little, I used to wonder why you and Mom stopped touching each other. Not just the big gestures. I mean the little ones. The hand on the shoulder when passing in the kitchen. The kiss goodbye in the morning. It all just stopped. Sarah, let me finish, she said gently. I spent my entire marriage trying to force those moments with David. Trying to create the kind of connection I thought I was supposed to want. But it never felt natural, never felt real. We were both just going through the motions of what we thought love should look like. Daniel felt a familiar pang of guilt. I'm sorry we didn't give you a better example. That's not what I'm saying. Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. I'm saying I finally understand the difference between settling for someone and actually connecting with them. The question isn't whether Lily is too young for you. The question is whether she makes you feel alive in a way that's worth the complications. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. The name on the screen made his heart race. Morrison Gallery. Answer it, Sarah said, reading his hesitation. Daniel Richardson, he said, his voice carefully professional. Mr. Richardson? It was Mrs. Morrison herself, her voice crisp and businesslike. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I got your number from my nephew Jake. I understand you've visited our gallery recently? Daniel's eyes met Sarah's, who was watching with unconcealed curiosity. Yes, I have. It's a wonderful space. I'm glad you think so. I'm calling because we're hosting a special exhibition next month. Second Chances. Artists who reinvented their lives. I thought it might interest you, given your background in corporate transitions. We're looking for sponsors, and Jake mentioned your firm might be interested in supporting local arts initiatives. Daniel almost laughed at the transparent setup. Jake Morrison was either more observant or more strategic than he'd given him credit for. The exhibition opens next Friday evening, Mrs. Morrison continued. It's quite remarkable, featuring artists who made dramatic career changes later in life. We have a former lawyer who became a sculptor at 50, a retired banker who now creates stunning photography, a corporate executive who left it all behind to paint. I think you'd find their stories inspiring. I see, Daniel managed. And will your full staff be working the opening? Of course. Lily has been instrumental in curating this particular show. She has such insight into the psychology of transformation, don't you think? Daniel closed his eyes. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate the invitation, but, oh, I'm not inviting you as a potential sponsor. The older woman interrupted smoothly. I'm inviting you as someone who understands that life is too short to spend it being someone you're not. The exhibition runs for 6 weeks, Mr. Richardson. But opening night is special. It's when the artists get to tell their stories, when people get to see that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. After she hung up, Daniel sat in silence, staring at his phone. Well, Sarah prompted. The gallery is having an exhibition about people who changed their lives later in life. Lily curated it. Ah, Sarah nodded knowingly. And you think this is a coincidence? I think this is manipulation. Or maybe, Sarah stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. It's an opportunity. Dad, can I ask you something? What scared you more? That Lily might reject you, or that she might not? The question hung in the air between them, uncomfortable in its accuracy. I've spent my entire adult life making safe choices, Daniel said quietly. Safe job, safe marriage, safe investments, safe friends. And look where it got me, divorced. Estranged from my daughter until recently, going through the motions of a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. So what would an unsafe choice look like? Daniel thought about Lily's laugh, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about art, about how she'd seen something in him that he'd forgotten existed. He thought about the sketch hidden in his desk drawer, about the part of himself that had awakened in her presence. Terrifying, he answered honestly. Good, Sarah smiled. The best things usually are. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked through his apartment, noting how sterile it felt, how carefully curated to project success rather than personality. In his study, he opened the desk drawer and pulled out the sketch of Lily. Even his amateur attempt had captured something essential about her, the openness, the hope, the vitality that seemed to radiate from her very being. On impulse, he opened his laptop and began to write. Not a business proposal or a financial analysis, but words that came from somewhere deeper. He wrote about art and connection, about the fear of taking chances, about the difference between existing and living. The words flowed more easily than any he'd written in 20 years. When he finally looked up, dawn was breaking over the city, painting his white walls with shades of gold and rose. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something approaching peace. He had a choice to make, and for once in his life, he was going to choose based on hope rather than fear. But first, he had a phone call to make. Sarah? He knocked gently on her door. Are you awake? I need your help with something. The Morrison Gallery had been transformed for the opening night. Soft lighting cast dramatic shadows across the walls, highlighting the extraordinary collection of artwork created by people who had dared to reinvent themselves. Daniel stood at the entrance, his palms sweating despite the cool October evening. Sarah squeezed his arm reassuringly. You look good, Dad. Really good. She wasn't wrong. They'd spent the afternoon shopping, something Daniel couldn't remember doing since Sarah was a teenager. Gone was his usual corporate uniform, replaced by dark jeans, a charcoal cashmere sweater, and a jacket that managed to be both sophisticated and approachable. More importantly, he carried with him a manila envelope containing something he'd never thought he'd share with another soul. Remember what we practiced? Sarah whispered as they approached the reception desk. Daniel nodded, though his mouth felt dry. Be honest. Be brave. Be myself. And if she's with that Jake guy, then I tell her how I feel anyway. No more running away. The gallery buzzed with conversation and the gentle clink of wine glasses. Daniel recognized the mix of patrons, art lovers, potential buyers, friends and family of the featured artists. But his eyes searched for only one person. He found her near the back of the gallery, standing before a massive painting that seemed to pulse with raw emotion. She wore a black dress that was both elegant and artistic, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She was alone, studying the artwork with the intense concentration Daniel had come to associate with her passion for her work. There she is, Sarah murmured. Go. But Daniel hesitated. From across the room, he could see the subtle tension in Lily's shoulders, the way she held herself slightly apart from the crowd. She looked beautiful but guarded, and he wondered if their separation had hurt her as much as it had hurt him. Daniel Richardson. He turned to see Mrs. Morrison approaching, resplendent in flowing purple silk and silver jewelry that caught the gallery lights. She embraced him warmly, as if they were old friends rather than near strangers. I'm so glad you came, she said, her eyes twinkling with unmistakable mischief. And you brought a friend? This is my daughter, Sarah, Daniel replied, grateful for the momentary distraction. Daughter? Mrs. Morrison's eyebrows rose. How wonderful. Lily mentioned you had a daughter about her age. Sarah, you simply must meet our star curator. She's done remarkable work on this exhibition." Before Daniel could object, Mrs. Morrison was leading them through the crowd toward Lily. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as they approached. "Lily, dear," Mrs. Morrison called out, "look who decided to join us tonight." Lily turned, and Daniel watched a complex series of emotions play across her face. Surprise, hurt, hope, and something that might have been relief. Her eyes moved from Daniel to Sarah, and he saw the moment she made the connection. "Hello," Lily said carefully, extending her hand to Sarah. "I'm Lily Chen." "Sarah Richardson," Sarah replied with a warm smile. "Dad's told me so much about you and your work here. This exhibition is incredible." "Thank you." Lily's response was polite but cautious. "It means a lot to showcase these artists. Their courage to start over, to follow their true passions despite the obstacles. It's inspiring." An awkward silence stretched between them until Mrs. Morrison cleared her throat. "Well, I should go check on the caterers. Sarah, would you like to meet some of our featured artists? I think you'd find their stories fascinating." It was a transparent setup, but Sarah played along beautifully. "I'd love that, Mrs. Morrison." She squeezed Daniel's arm. "Dad, why don't you let Lily show you the exhibition? I'm sure she has insights about the pieces that you'd appreciate." And then Daniel and Lily were alone, the gallery crowd providing a buffer of noise and activity around their island of tension. "I didn't know you were coming," Lily said, her voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Morrison called. She was very persuasive. Daniel paused, studying Lily's face. "I almost didn't come. What changed your mind?" Daniel took a deep breath, remembering Sarah's advice about honesty. "I realized I was being a coward, that I was so afraid of making a mistake that I was missing out on something extraordinary." Lily's composure wavered slightly. "Daniel, let me finish," he said gently. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself that walking away was the right thing to do, the mature thing, the appropriate thing. But all I've accomplished is making myself miserable and, I suspect, hurting you in the process." "You did hurt me," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because you walked away. I understand your concerns about our age difference, about what people might think. You hurt me because you didn't trust me enough to have a real conversation about it. You just disappeared." Daniel felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm used to making decisions alone, but this wasn't just my decision to make." They stood in silence for a moment, the energy between them crackling with unspoken words. Around them, the exhibition continued, people admiring art created by individuals who had found the courage to change their lives. "Would you like to see the exhibition?" Lily asked finally. "Really see it, I mean, not just the polite walkthrough I gave you before." Daniel nodded, and they began to move through the gallery together. Lily's demeanor shifted as she fell into her role as curator, her passion for the art and the artist's stories beginning to override her personal guardedness. "This piece," she stopped before a sculpture made of twisted metal and glass, "was created by Margaret Stevens. She was a corporate lawyer for 30 years before she touched her first piece of clay at age 52. She said the law felt like building walls, but sculpting felt like breaking them down." Daniel studied the sculpture, seeing both destruction and creation in its twisted forms. What made her change? Her husband died suddenly. She realized she'd spent so much time building a life that looked successful from the outside that she'd forgotten to build one that felt meaningful from the inside. Lily glanced at Daniel. She said grief taught her the difference. They moved to the next piece, a series of photographs capturing urban decay transformed by nature. "And this is Robert Chen's work. He left investment banking at 48 to become a photographer. Everyone told him he was having a midlife crisis. Was he? He says yes, and that it was the best crisis of his life. That sometimes you have to fall apart before you can put yourself back together into who you were meant to be." As they continued through the exhibition, Daniel began to understand what Lily had really curated. This wasn't just an art show. It was a love letter to courage, a celebration of second chances, a reminder that it was never too late to become authentic. "There's one more piece I want to show you," Lily said as they reached a quiet corner of the gallery. "This one is special." The painting before them was small but powerful, a self-portrait of a middle-aged man, but painted in two halves. The left side showed him in a business suit, his expression tired and resigned. The right side showed the same face, but younger somehow, alive with hope and possibility. "The artist is here tonight," Lily continued. "His name is Thomas Wright. He was a financial advisor for 25 years before he started painting. He said this piece represents the moment he realized he had a choice. He could keep being the person circumstances had made him, or he could become the person his heart wanted him to be." Daniel stared at the painting, seeing himself reflected in both halves. How old was he when he painted this? 45, Lily said quietly. The number hit Daniel like a physical blow. He looked at Lily, seeing the intentionality behind her choice to bring him to this particular piece. "Lily," he began, then stopped. Words felt inadequate for what he needed to say. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the manila envelope he'd been carrying. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wrote," Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "The night after Mrs. Morrison called. I haven't written anything personal in 20 years, but after I met you, after I saw your exhibition the first time, something woke up in me that I'd buried so deep I thought it was dead." Lily took the envelope with trembling hands. "Daniel, I know I'm older than you," he continued, the words rushing out now. "I know I come with complications and baggage and more caution than anyone should have to deal with. I know that loving me might not be the easy choice for you." "Loving you?" Lily's voice was barely audible. "Yes," Daniel said, meeting her eyes directly. "Because that's what this is, Lily. I love you. I love your passion and your wisdom and the way you see beauty in everything around you. I love that you made me remember who I used to be and showed me who I might still become. I love that you're brave enough to believe in second chances." Tears were beginning to gather in Lily's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I can't promise you that this will be easy," Daniel continued. "People will judge us. There will be challenges I can't even anticipate. But I can promise you that if you're willing to take this chance with me, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you're giving me." Lily was quiet for so long that Daniel began to fear he'd misread everything, that his declaration had come too late or been too much. But then she smiled, that radiant smile that had captivated him from the first moment in the bookstore. "You know what Thomas Wright told me when I interviewed him for this exhibition?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "He said that the biggest risk isn't in changing your life. The biggest risk is in not changing it, in staying safe and small and never discovering what you're capable of becoming." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell her familiar floral scent. "I love you too, Daniel. I have since that first day in the rain, and I've spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself that it was foolish or impossible or wrong. But love isn't supposed to be practical, is it? It's supposed to be transformative." Daniel reached for her then, his hands cupping her face gently. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, once we commit to this, I don't want to walk away again. I don't think I could survive it." "Then don't walk away," Lily whispered. "Stay. Choose the unsafe choice. Choose love." When Daniel kissed her, the gallery around them seemed to fade away. There was only this moment, this choice, this leap of faith they were taking together. When they finally broke apart, Daniel realized that people were watching, some with curiosity, some with approval, some with judgment. But for the first time in his adult life, he didn't care what anyone else thought. "So," Lily said, her voice slightly breathless, "what happens now?" Daniel smiled, feeling younger than he had in decades. "Now we have our second chance." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Daniel's downtown condo, but the sterile white walls had been transformed. Lily's artwork covered nearly every surface. Some pieces from gallery exhibitions she'd curated, others created during late-night creative sessions when inspiration struck. The minimalist furniture remained, but it was now softened by colorful throw pillows, vintage books stacked on coffee tables, and plants that Lily insisted on rescuing from the clearance sections of garden centers. Daniel stood in the kitchen, making coffee for two, a ritual that had become his favorite part of each day. The rich aroma filled the space as Lily emerged from the bedroom, her hair tousled from sleep, wearing one of his button-down shirts over her pajama shorts. "Good morning," she murmured, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and pressing a kiss to his shoulder blade. "Morning, beautiful," Daniel replied, turning in her embrace to drop a kiss on her forehead. Even after 6 months, the simple domesticity of their mornings felt like a miracle. The months since the gallery exhibition had been a whirlwind of adjustments, challenges, and unexpected joys. Daniel had kept his promise about not walking away, and Lily had proven that her feelings ran deeper than infatuation or rebellion. They'd weathered the initial storm of public curiosity, family adjustments, and their own learning curve about navigating a relationship across generational lines. "Your phone's been buzzing," Lily said, nodding toward the device on the counter. "Sarah's been texting you." Daniel picked up the phone, smiling at his daughter's messages. "Don't forget, dinner at 7. And yes, you can bring Lily. Mom's actually excited to meet her." "Who would have thought? Dinner with the ex-wife tonight," Daniel told Lily, watching her face carefully. "Are you ready for that? Are you?" Lily countered, pouring herself coffee and adding the ridiculous amount of cream she preferred. "I think so. Catherine's been surprisingly supportive. She said seeing me happy reminded her of why she fell in love with me in the first place, before we both got lost in trying to be people we weren't." It was true. Catherine's initial shock at learning about Lily had quickly given way to something approaching approval. "You're different," she'd told Daniel during a coffee meeting to discuss Sarah's living situation. "More like the person I married, before we both became so afraid of everything." The doorbell chimed, interrupting Daniel's thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone, but when he opened the door, he found Mrs. Morrison standing in the hallway, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing her trademark knowing smile. "Mrs. Morrison," Daniel said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "Good news," she announced, sweeping past him into the apartment. "Lily, dear, you're going to want to sit down for this." Lily emerged from the kitchen, looking curious and slightly concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, my dear. Everything's right." Mrs. Morrison set the champagne on the coffee table with a flourish. "I just received a call from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They want to feature our Second Chances exhibition in their contemporary wing. Full reproduction, 6-month run, with you as the guest curator." Lily's coffee mug slipped from her hands, but Daniel caught it before it could hit the floor. "The Met? Are you serious?" "Completely serious. They were particularly impressed with your artist interviews and the way you contextualized the theme of transformation. This is huge, Lily. Career-making huge." Daniel watched the shock and joy play across Lily's features, his heart swelling with pride. Over the past months, he'd watched her confidence as a curator grow, had seen her develop her own voice in the art world. This recognition was everything she deserved. "There's just one small detail, Mrs. Morrison continued, her expression shifting slightly. "The position would be based in New York. They're offering you a 2-year contract with the possibility of permanent placement." The joy on Lily's face flickered, and Daniel felt his stomach drop. New York. Of course it would be New York. The opportunity of a lifetime, in a city 400 miles away from everything they'd built together. "I." Lily looked between Mrs. Morrison and Daniel, clearly struggling. "When would they need an answer?" 2 weeks, Mrs. Morrison replied gently. "I know it's a big decision. Life-changing, really." After Mrs. Morrison left, they sat in silence on the couch, the champagne unopened between them. Daniel could practically see the wheels turning in Lily's mind, could sense her internal struggle between personal happiness and professional fulfillment. "You have to take it," Daniel said finally. "Do I?" Lily's voice was small, uncertain. "Lily, this is the Met. This is what you've worked for your entire career. I can't be the reason you turn down your dreams. But what about us? What about everything we've built here?" Daniel took her hands in his, noting how perfectly they fit despite the disparity in their life experiences. "What about us is that we love each other. And love means wanting the other person to become everything they're capable of becoming. Even if it means being apart? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the fears they'd been avoiding. Daniel thought about his failed marriage, about the compromises and resentments that had slowly eroded what he'd once thought was unbreakable love. But this felt different. Lily felt different. Maybe, Daniel said slowly, it doesn't have to mean being apart. Lily looked up at him, hope flickering in her storm-gray eyes. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time for my own second chance. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had been his home for decades. I've been thinking a lot lately about that story you told me, about the tech executive who gave up everything to become an artist. What if I told you I've been having conversations with a headhunter about opportunities in New York? Daniel. Lily's voice was breathless. I'm 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years building a life that looks successful but feels empty. Meeting you didn't just change how I feel about love. It changed how I feel about everything. About taking risks, about following passion instead of just security, about the difference between existing and living. He turned back to face her, seeing tears gathering in her eyes. If you take this job, and you should take this job, I want to come with you. Not because I can't live without you, but because I don't want to. Not because you need me, but because I need the adventure of building a life with you. Are you sure? Lily whispered. You'd leave everything? Your company, your routine, your safety net. Daniel thought about his old life, the predictable days, the careful choices, the growing sense that he was sleepwalking through his own existence. Then he thought about the past 6 months with Lily, the laughter, the spontaneous adventures, the way she'd helped him remember what it felt like to be fully alive. My safety net became a prison, he said. You showed me how to break free. Lily launched herself into his arms then, and Daniel caught her easily, spinning her around the sun-drenched apartment. When he set her down, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. I love you, she said, framing his face with her hands. I love that you're brave enough to start over, that you're willing to take this leap with me. I love you too, Daniel replied, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. As they held each other in the morning light, surrounded by the evidence of their blended lives, Daniel marveled at the turns his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a man resigned to loneliness, convinced that his best days were behind him. Now he was planning to uproot his entire existence for love, for adventure, for the chance to discover who he might become when he stopped being afraid. His phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. P.S. I'm thinking about applying to graduate programs in New York. Just saying. Daniel showed Lily the message and they both laughed. It seems, Lily said, that second chances might be contagious. The best things usually are, Daniel replied, echoing her words from months earlier. Outside their window, the city hummed with activity, millions of people living their lives, making their choices, taking their chances. Some would choose safety, others would choose adventure. But Daniel Richardson, at 45, had finally learned the difference between growing older and growing up, between settling and soaring. He'd learned that love doesn't ask permission from society's expectations, doesn't calculate age differences or worry about what others might think. Real love simply asks one question. Are you brave enough to say yes to the person who makes you more yourself than you've ever been? As he held Lily close, breathing in her familiar scent and feeling her heartbeat against his chest, Daniel knew his answer. He'd spent 20 years saying no to life, no to risk, no to the messy, complicated, beautiful possibility of real connection. But with Lily, surrounded by art and possibility and the promise of adventures yet to come, Daniel Richardson was finally ready to say yes. Love, he discovered, truly was beyond time, transcending age, convention, and fear to create something entirely new. Something worth risking everything for. Something worth starting over for, no matter how old you think you are. In the end, Daniel reflected it wasn't about being too old for love. It was about being brave enough to believe you're never too old to begin again. Epilogue. 1 year later, New York City, the opening night of Lily's second Metropolitan Museum exhibition, Love and transformation in contemporary art was everything she dreamed it would be. Critics praised her innovative curation, artists thanked her for her insight and support, and Daniel watched from across the room with pride radiating from every pore. He looked different in New York, younger somehow, despite the silver threading through his hair. The move had been good for him. His new consulting firm, specializing in helping executives transition to more meaningful careers, was thriving. He'd even started writing again, working on a memoir about second chances that had already attracted interest from publishers. Sarah approached him, radiant in her engagement dress. She was marrying a fellow graduate student she'd met in her Columbia journalism program. "You know," she said, slipping her arm through his, "when I was growing up, I never understood what love was supposed to look like. But watching you and Lily, now I know. It's supposed to look like courage." Across the room, Lily caught his eye and smiled, that radiant, transformative smile that had changed everything. She was surrounded by admirers and journalists, glowing with professional success, but her eyes sought his in the crowd. Daniel smiled back, raising his champagne glass in a silent toast, to second chances, to unexpected love, to the courage to become who you were meant to be, no matter when you finally figure out who that is. Some love stories, Daniel had learned, don't begin with once upon a time. Sometimes they begin with never too late. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they never really end at all.